Welcome to Anita Talks History and Genealogy. I'm so glad that you all can join me on this beautiful day, and I hope everyone is doing well. Um, Today, I want to, remind you before we get started to hit the like, subscribe, share button, and to comment. The comments and the conversations are really healthy as long as it's not, you're coming from a good place. If you have legitimate questions, please do, add them, because someone may need to, get maybe asking or wanting to say the same thing. And then we can get that conversation started. And I also want to say that next week on the 22nd, there is a workshop. I'm having a genealogy workshop online, and I want folks to sign up for the workshop. If you are a paid subscriber, you can come to the workshop for free. I have a $45 registration fee because there are costs to running a workshop as far as time is concerned, as far as getting that online venue, and putting together the documents and everything that I want to share with people, whatever level you are, wherever you are, because wherever you are, you want to get further. That's why you're, on Anita Talks History and Genealogy. And the other part that I want to share is that I have merch. I have cups, I have hats, I have shirts and jackets, you name it. So there's a link to the merch on my community, on the community section. I think that you all have access to the community section. So check it out, And today, I'm just generally speaking to everyone about, some of the questions that have been posed to me. Like one sister was talking about, finding, beginning that search, or either, then there's people that are, have already started and they've hit a brick wall, and that causes a lot of frustration. And thing that I want to say, want to tell people is that sometimes you run into a brick wall, then you can back off. Maybe you want to start another line. Maybe this is on your father's line, you want to go to your mother's line, or to another line that isn't so, that isn't as frustrated, and then you come back to that line. What I mean by that is I have a mother and a father. My mother and father had a mother and father, and so these are already, there's me, and then there's already 4 people, and then they have 4 people on each side, and all these lines. And sometimes you run into a line that you wasn't even looking for, and then you run that line. So what you do is, don't stop. If you hit a brick wall, don't say it's not there. Just look in another direction, or find an easier person to trace, and think about what the people would say, the ancestors would say about our people, because they were always talking about our people. I wasn't, my mother talked to me about who our people were, but when we would have family gatherings, you would hear them talking. They weren't talking directly to me, but they'd be talking about so and so, and the things that this person did, who was a relative of my grandparents or my father, and there was one person figure. He was a photographer, and all the pictures that we had, he took those pictures, and I vaguely remember him. But one of his children contacted us and said, "Do you remember so and so? I am his son." And they had not been able to locate him. So, you know, they ran into a brick wall. But we were able to connect through that person. So that, the other, the easier lines for me were the ones that were in, where I lived. Because on that side, which is my mother's side, they had been there, but there's one, on my mother's paternal side, they had been there in that region, the Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, Delaware region. That's where their ancestral roots were. That's where my mother's father's, so that's my maternal grandfather's roots. They're in Pennsylvania. My maternal grandmother's roots were Virginia. So they came from Virginia. That's on the mother's side. On my maternal grandmother's father's side, they came from South Carolina. So the ones that came from Virginia were free. The one on my mother's side of the family, the Ruths, who lived in Chester County, Pennsylvania, he came up, great-grandfather Ruth came up after the Civil War because he was a slave. So that's his mother was the only traceable slave we have found, looking through our ancestors. The only one that traces back to Africa. There were other slaves in our family, but they were indigenous. And that's what people miss, that when Columbus and Americus Vespucci came to these Americas, what was then Turtle Island, they enslaved the natives. They didn't say, oh, we're going to bring the Africans over now. We got this land. No, they enslaved the natives. They brutalized the natives. The natives didn't just die from disease. They were brutalized. And they were enslaved. And so, my grandfather on my paternal side, his people were from Colombia, South America. And they were enslaved. They were brought as slaves to South Carolina. And guess what? He lived not too far from Columbia, South Carolina. Makes you wonder. But, but this is how complex it is when you're trying to dig all that up. And so you have to I would suggest rather, you don't have to do anything, but I would suggest you get a chart and start charting the people as you find them. And the dates that you find them, where you found them at. Even if there's gaps, just, fill in the gaps that you can fill in. And move, and keep it going, and don't get stuck on the block. If it's a block, let it sit and then come back later. Well, I found that to be successful in my case because all the moving around and, people from South, so when I'm looking at South Carolina from Pennsylvania, there was very little information on who, on the slaves and who owned them. And that's when I learned how to look at the wills and look at their last names. Like my great-grandfather kept his white father's last name, Ruth. So I went back to, and then he's where he came from, Beaufort District, South Carolina, where, and then he was sold by the white father to Savannah, Georgia. So all of these places, were places where I was looking at the records. And Georgia, because of General Sherman, a lot of their records were destroyed. But I did manage to find that my ancestor, my great-grandfather, who was sold to Savannah, after the Civil War, I found records about his sister, who was still, she was a domestic servant in the same house where they had been enslaved at. And my great-grandfather had, the 54th Massachusetts found him and his brother and took him to Burlington, New Jersey. So that's where he was. He was 13 and he was taken to Burlington, New Jersey. So I found information on my grandfather in the records of the 54th Massachusetts. And in the records of my great-great-grandfather, where my great-grandfather was taken he went north with the 54th Massachusetts, and they left him in Burlington, New Jersey. And my great-grandmother, the woman he married, was the daughter of the preacher who raised him from the time he was 13. So I got information from there, from the Baptist Church, from the Civil War, 54th Massachusetts. After the Civil War, when they started, keeping census again, I got records. So all of this information was important to write down and to use as part of your, as part of your records. So you can leave hints. And guess what? Maybe if you can't get beyond the brick wall, maybe somebody coming after you or somebody else may have got beyond it. But just make sure you write down, you keep notes, and keep that information in front of you. Don't let it, don't just say, oh, it's a brick wall, I'll never get through it. No, just, keep looking, and make sure that you sign up for the workshop. It's $45 registration fee unless you are, if you're subscribed to my channel, there is no fee. And we're also going to be giving, merch and stuff for those who register and participate in the workshop. In order to register, please let me know that you want to come, and I'll make sure that you get the registration information. It's going to be on my on my post. So pay attention, and if you just want to donate, Cash App, $ AWills920 is my Cash App. And there's also other information about, if you want to donate. So just have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you again for tuning in, and I will see you soon.